Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Modernizing the Citizen Journey Through Data, sponsored by Kodak Alaris on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Justin Herman, who leads the Emerging Citizen Technology Program at the General Services Administration, Marcy Jacobs, the Design Practice Director for the U.S. Digital Service in the White House, and Acting Agency Lead for the Digital Services Team at the Veterans Affairs Department, Aisha Davina, a former Senior Advisor in the Office of the Administrator at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and Daryl Hillary, the Federal Director of Strategic Alliances for Kodak Alaris. Now, at the very end of segment one, Marcy brought up this idea of silos and this idea that if you don't step out of your silos, if everyone just works kind of in their swim lane, if you will, that does not turn into a good user experience. Daryl, expand upon that a little bit.
Well, we know that those silos really put unnecessary cycle time on any given process, right? You can't move quickly or be agile when you've got walls that are in the way. But to be honest, it's the federal government that we're talking about. You could spend your entire career trying to break down silos in probably just one organization itself. If you think about the world of classified work, silos are deliberately built in. It's part of how they're structured. So when we start talking about document workflows, which is the area where we live, how can we make sure that we're effectively sharing information across these silos without people not necessarily even having to get the right permissions, not putting undue cycle time on response time in regards to that process? One of the things that Justin mentioned earlier, which only techie people get excited about, is the AI options that are out there, right? How can we make our workflows, our documents inherently smart? How can we get the machine learning aspects of the technology that we bring in to utilize silos to our advantage to the point where they're not barriers anymore? You can maintain the level of security that you need. You can maintain the permissions that you want, but at the same time be effective in your responses, be agile enough to get your customers to achieve the mission that they need. And you guys are doing some stuff like that now, right?
Yep. I'd actually like to back it up a little bit on a story of how we got into this and how we got into machine learning and AI. It was earlier in the year. There was a natural disaster that occurred, and as sometimes happened, we got called in to try to help on the spot to be able to create an emergency digital operations center at a local level, on a city level. And what we found was, because of the success of digital government, people more and more are using those channels. They're sharing things online. They're creating Reddit boards. They're doing all these things because we told them to do this and to use digital government. But what happened is that our ability to make actionable and digestible those things left the reach of many people. And again, that's when we get down to that there's so much data, structured, unstructured, sitting on the table, is we found we can create wonderful little dashboards and a site that encapsulated and showed all these requests for help. Tens of thousands a day could come in, but we couldn't operationalize it on the spot. And that was a very cold wake-up call and a harrowing experience to be able to track that need from citizens and to know that even though we had the data somehow available, that the challenge would be how can we operationalize it. So we said never again we're going to let that happen. That's when the interest in machine learning went from supportive to driven by the need for it, because it's not just an emergency management that need is, where we talk about the silos and different programs and sectioned off, we're leaving so much on the table that if we could only make it actionable and digestible for operations, it could change so much about our organizations, not just how citizens engage with government, but how government works within itself. So specifically the model, and I'm not going to be quiet about there's not so secret agenda that I have in developing an approach to it. It's called the no wrong door approach. We have call centers on one side. We have websites with web forms on another. We have the development of smart chatbots and things like that happening. We have the advent of things like Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. It is possible to have all these things linked together through one intelligent backend where it doesn't matter whether you make a call, whether you go to a web form, whether you use a chatbot, all of that is made actionable and digestible and operational. This is not the future. I have already seen it. We're already moving in that direction, and we're already working with fantastic organizations around government who we're not twisting their arms. They're asking, they want to be part of it. And you're going to see these things happen happen very quickly, either through pilot programs, new RFPs. Again, when I talk about the fact of like right now in IT modernization and using this data, machine learning is already at the forefront of it. It's just a matter of, again, things rolling out.
So Justin, we've heard this a little bit before about the no wrong door approach, right? And if you go back to the Bush administration, which I will, talk about 3 clicks to service, right? Click on a website, one more click, you finally get what you need. No more than 3 clicks to service. We've heard this idea of the merging of the Pueblo, Colorado wonderful call center from the 70s that we all loved, the PSAs that happened in Saturday morning cartoons to get your information, all the way to now everything can be online. When you talk about the no wrong door approach, it's this idea that no matter me as a citizen comes in, I'm going to find what I need no matter how I get there.
Exactly.
The path always leads, if you will, to the answer.
Yes, exactly. And also, we are capturing that. And it's not just dying on somebody's individual Excel spreadsheet somewhere in some silo.
You're capturing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're capturing in the sense that, like, if I came in and I needed something about veterans benefits and I started at GSA for some whatever reason, and I never got to vets.gov, just to bring in Marcy for a second, that data is being captured by the machine learning piece. I'm just trying to...
The analytic backend. And also then it makes it easier to find relationships and to be able to flow, because there's 2 tyrannies that we're dealing with at IT modernization. One is the tyranny of government bureaucracy. The services that people need come from some sub-agency or sub-thing, and an organization they don't know exists, and it's not their job to know it exists. It's our job to provide them those services. The other tyranny, of course, is of our technology and of technology itself, where if somebody needs help, they shouldn't have to decide, do I wait for an hour on a call? Do I send an email? Do I send a tweet or whatever? There should be no wrong answer to that question, and it's on us to do it.
Interesting. Marcy, jump in.
And I would just chime in that if you have to switch channels, if you're online and then you have to call, that you don't have to start over. You're not starting from zero, because there is that integration. The more we can make self-service, the more the people who actually need to talk to a human because they have an edge case, because they have something that is really specific that can't be handled through self-service, ideally they won't have to wait on hold for 2 hours, because the call volume of the people who truly need that 800 number goes down dramatically.
Yes.
And that's because the information that's needed, meaning that the citizen is looking for, is easier to find based on the experiences of others. Do I understand that right? So the people who do end up needing to call, there's fewer of them because more people are being satisfied.
We see that specifically with call centers, that humans, the subject matter experts, are bound to repetitive answering of the same 10 questions, usually on average, and then only 35% call complete rate of where the tier 2, where you need subject matter expertise. So if we could find ways to automate in any way we can, or make it so people can more easier access those 10 questions, we're talking about augmentation, where now we're able to do more with it.
But Aisha, I want to talk to a human, right? With CMS, you're dealing with people who are disabled or people who are elderly who just want a human too, right?
Yes.
You got to find the happy medium. That's what I'm trying to get to, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to pick up on, though, is you talked about, automating and they're answering the same questions over and over. And I think this was one of our biggest challenges. I go back to the data was so important to understand the who predicted, right? Because if you don't know that 80% of your target audience looks like this versus that, I mean, you want to right size the types of, things that you're putting forward in self-service, right? So how do you determine what are the edge cases for, your typical Pareto type analysis, right? That was where I think a lot of the work that we were doing was trying to predict and understand, what are those things that we need to make sure are out there for everyone versus what are the things that are going to be at the fringe and require more hand-holding, so we can optimize our communications, our training, our services, our call center, and how do we, one of the big struggles for us, especially in launching a new program, was how do we operationalize that sort of immediate learning from Go Launch, right? Like we thought, 60% of our questions were going to be this, but it ended up being that. How do we cycle that through very, very quickly and efficiently to push out that next stage of sort of self-service and automation?
Marcy.
And then how do you take these questions that get asked over and over and over, that someone is being paid to answer the phone, 10 times an hour and answer the same exact thing? That should be feeding back in to improve the upstream problem. Because for many people, granted, some people do want to talk to a human. Most people don't. Most people
wanna go on with their day
Most
and
people
get
want to
their
go
services.
because they know if they're going to call an 800 number, they're sitting. I mean, it's like when you have to call the cable company. I need to get a new router, and I needed to get a new router for 2 weeks. I don't have an hour to sit on the phone. If I could do that online, that would be awesome. So the more we can put these services on computers and make this a very easy system, whether it's transactional or informational, and use the call center volume to feed into where are the problems? How do we use that as a way to inform where we tackle our next improvements?
And one of the things I'll say, sort of feeding on that, I think we were surprised when our program launched. I mean, most inquiries were actually coming in through email because they didn't have the time. I mean, a lot of our audiences in this case was the provider centric. So you had the practice managers or so-and-so. I mean, they're trying to schedule patients and do other things, and they're trying to fire off their questions in the moment that they have it. And part of that was because we'd done a lot of the user-centered work to understand like the environment in which they were trying to come up to speed on these programs. And while we would like them to spend an hour on our webinars, they probably only have 10 minutes between the last patient and getting their lunch or whatever. So trying to make the program accessible and the information in the context of which they are able to access the information. So we had a lot coming in through email, not because that fit into their routine, but also because they wanted a record of the response. They wanted to be able to have oh yeah, this is what they said
I
to me.
called 3 times, I emailed 3 times, and
Well, and no, but here's
And
the
Beetlejuice
details.
appeared.
But this is the details of what they told me I needed to do.
okay.
Right, so it was just so it was almost that they could tape it up on the tack board and be like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, or this is what I needed to know about it. That they could have that reliable source of information to go back to. So it's not always about I want to talk to a person. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't.
Maybe for me, I just like to talk to people. I always hit 0 first. Daryl, let me turn to you. React a little bit to what you're hearing, because when you go to federal clients and customers and talk to them and listen to their needs, are these 3 on the cutting edge, and most agencies aren't there yet, or are we seeing has the needle moved?
I would absolutely say that they're on the cutting edge because they're concerned about the overall experience of that end user. And what I find in the more, I don't want to say advanced, but the more open organizations that are actively trying to deal with this problem, they're coming to private sector participants to be able to say, help us with these workflows. Like, we understand that we have a problem inside here right now. There's got to be a better way, but we're not going to be able to figure it out on our own. It's got to be one of those public-private partnerships to be able to go forward. So when we see organizations that are forward-thinking, saying, hey, you know what, we've got to get this fixed. We know this is a problem. We can't boil the ocean. We can't solve everything, but this aspect of our customer experience, we know there's a better way to do it. And one of the easiest ways to do it is, let's tear down the walls that we have right now, the conceptions of how we have to get this done. Does it still have to be a form? It still amazes me how much of citizen interaction with the federal government still relies on a paper document. That someone has to either send away for, go to that location to fill out, and that process in itself is wrought with errors. It's designed almost to, number one, increase that amount of unstructured data that we talked about. You can't really use any of that information except what that person writes down. What if they write down something that's wrong, right? Then you lose that aspect of information. So are there better ways to design the workflows that government uses to interact with its citizenry to provide a better experience? Those are the calls where, that we get, and the solution providers are like, yes, we can actually, let's talk about that. Let's figure out ways we can either bring in new technology, but before we even get tied down to one technology, let's look at the workflow. Let's look at the output that you want to get to, and let's design for success at that level.
Daryl brings up the workflow issue. Marcy, lead us down the path to IT modernization now, how that kind of fits together.
Sure, and I just want to chime in. I think that it really starts with understanding what's really happening. I think that there are people who sit in conference rooms and talk about where the perceived problems are, but they aren't actually seeing, to Aisha's point earlier, what the physician who is trying to understand a new 800-page regulation during their lunch break is really dealing with. So understanding that human aspect, I think, is critical before you start thinking about technology or how do you throw shininess at this. IT modernization, I think, a lot of times is perceived to be a technology issue, and I don't know of any agency, correct me if you do, that their mission is to just have shiny technology. So really it has to come down to what does the technology enable and what is the agency's mission, and the technology should be in support of that. So starting with a technology first or IT first perspective typically is rebuilding some legacy something where requirements were gathered 20 or 30 years ago that may or may not actually be meeting today's needs. There's likely not a mobile component. There's likely a lot of change from when something was conceived of a very long time ago to the current state. And potentially there's a lot of things that don't need to be modernized and don't need to be rebuilt at all.
Aisha?
Just really quickly jumping on the mobile piece of it, I thought one of the user experience leads we had at CMS had a perspective on starting with a mobile first development perspective, and I think part of it was because it really drove a discipline of, I've got a very small footprint here to deal with. It drove a footprint of focusing on what is most important to focus on, and really sort of cutting through the forest for the trees of like what are the essential elements we need to get across. And that was not only in the communications and presentation, but it was also in like the data elements piece, like what's the minimum set of data that's really required.
And if it works on your mobile, it's going to work on your desktop.
Right.
And that's going to be best. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Modernizing the Citizen Journey Through Data, sponsored by Kodak Alaris, on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.